When you look at the state of gaming today, the first thing that really stands out is scale, because gaming has quietly become the largest entertainment industry in the world, and it didn't do it by accident. It did it by being everywhere all at once, on phones, consoles, PCs, streaming platforms, TVs, arenas, social media, everywhere. It's even inside other games, and because of that reach, gaming isn't niche anymore. It's become its own culture, and that changes everything: how games are made, how they're sold, how players treat them, because when something gets that big, it stops being about passion. It starts being about systems, sustainability, and predictability. And that's where a lot of tension comes in. In modern gaming, we go hand in hand. We've had more players than ever, more genres than ever, more ways to play, more accessibility options, and more technological power. But, on the other hand, we've had more frustration, more burnout, more players who feel like games are no longer trying to press them, but instead trying to keep them inside an ecosystem for as long as possible. And those two feelings exist at the same time: excitement and exhaustion, hype and skepticism. It's a huge part that comes into gaming nowadays. That feeling comes how games are monetized too, because the relationship between the player and the game has fundamentally changed. It's no longer buy a game, play it, finish it, remember it. It's now log in every day, complete the pass, check the store, don't miss the event, keep up with the meta, and that's constant pressure. It creates a high stress environment. Low stress gaming is hard to find. Unless you're playing a single player game, you're not going to be able to find it. Now people quit games because they're tired. They feel like the game is something like a job. They have to get on every day and grind. What's interesting is that none of these systems are automatically bad. Battle passes, cosmetics, live updates, all that can be fun when it's built around a strong core. But when the game starts feeling like it was designed backwards, like the monetization came first and the fun came second, players notice immediately. Once that trust is gone, it's incredibly hard to get back, because players today are informed. They compare notes online, they watch breakdowns, they understand mechanics. They can tell when a game is slowing down on purpose. And this ties directly into live service games, which have become one of the defining models of modern gaming. Because live service games don't want you to play, they want you to stay. They want to be your main game, your default option, the thing you check when you're bored, the thing you check when you don't feel like playing anything else. And for some reason, that works. They love having games. People love having games that evolve over years, where progress carries forward, communities form. You get to keep your cosmetics, content keeps coming. But for a lot of players, it starts to feel like an obligation rather than an escape. At the same time, you have a very interesting counter moment happening, where players are rediscovering single-player games, small experiences, niche titles that respect your time. Games that you can finish within a couple hours. Games that you can step away from and come back to later without a penalty. And the success of those games proves that the demand never went away. It was just buried under years of always on design. And when people talk about gaming, they talk about the past. They talk about nostalgia. They're talking about how games fit into their lives instead of trying to dominate them. Technology in gaming is now in a strange place too, because the raw capability standpoint, games have never looked better, sounded better, or felt more realistic. And yet, for a lot of players, graphical improvements don't hit the way they used to, because at a certain point, it's not just amazing, it's realism. And at that point, we're only going to get slightly more amazing. You can't get better than realism. And for a lot of people, it doesn't register emotionally. It's what people remember instead of mechanics that feel good. You're remembering the graphics instead of the systems that make sense, or worlds that feel alive, and stories that stick with long after you turn off the game. And the irony is, graphics get better, development gets harder, teams get bigger, timelines get longer, and releases get riskier. which leads to a more cautious design, more familiar formulas, more sequels, and more games that feel technically impressive but creatively safe. And that's why you see so much excitement around indie games, because indie developers aren't trying to win the market. They're trying to express an idea, and that difference shows up immediately when you play their game. Indie games right now are doing some of the most interesting work in the industry, not because they're small, but because they're focused. They know exactly what they want their game to be, and they don't apologize for it. And players respond to that. They'd rather play a game that commits to one strong idea than a massive game that tries everything for everyone. And streaming has amplified that effect, because now a unique game doesn't need to have a massive marketing budget. It needs a moment that resonates. Streaming and content creation have completely changed how games live in the world, because games are no longer just played. They're watched, reacted to, analyzed, clipped, and debated. That visibility is a double-edged sword, because it gives developers immediate feedback, but it also creates pressure to respond instantly, to adjust balance, to adjust controversy, and to manage perception on how much design. And not every studio is not equipped to handle that level of feedback. What players want more than anything right now is honesty. They want clear communication, realistic promises, and games that know what they are, because disappointment usually comes with mismatched expectations, not from flaws. And the studios that are doing well long term tend to be the ones that set boundaries, say no when needed, and design with intention instead of chasing trends. So, when people ask where gaming is going, the answer is in one direction. It's split. Gaming is expanding outward and inward at the same time. It's massive on platforms. It's a cross-media experience, and it has global audience. But it's getting smaller. It's getting more personal, because with these indie games, we want a certain type of gaming experience. The future of gaming isn't about returning to some golden age, to return to some nostalgia. It's about balance. It's about remembering that games are interactive experiences, and they should first be played, not monetized. And the studios have to understand that they're going to earn loyalty in the way that no battle pass ever could. Because at the end of the day, players don't remember retention curves, they remember moments, they remember how a game made them feel, when they played it, and who they played it with, no matter when their life is. In the state of gaming today, powerful, complicated, crowded, and still full of potential, but increasingly shaped by the choice developers make about what they value most. Because gaming isn't running out of players, it's running out of patience, and the next generation of games will be the ones that respect that. More about content creation. Content creation has completely changed gaming in a way that people don't always realize until they step back and look at it, because games aren't made to be played anymore. They're made to be watched, clipped, and optimized for thumbnails. They get broken down into moments, and once you design a game with the assumption that thousands or millions of people are going to experience it secondhand through a streamer instead of firsthand through a controller, the priorities shift, sometimes subtly, sometimes dramatically, and that shift has consequences. A lot of modern games are built around content moments, clip farming, not gameplay loops that look good in a clip. That's what they aim for. They want moments that trigger big reactions, moments that are chaotic, moments that surprise you, enough to survive a 30-second highlight reel on like TikTok. And while that can be fun, it also means quieter systems, slower builds, and more subtle design choices. They get careful. A lot of choices are pushed to the side because they don't perform well in an algorithm, and the algorithm doesn't care if something is deep. It cares if something is clickable. That creates a feedback loop where developers start watching creators to understand how their game is being perceived, how it's being played. Creators start playing it in exaggerated ways because they know what's happening. They know how the audience responds to them, and how players start mimicking creators because they see it on the stream. That's how they learned. And before long, the game itself feels less like an open experience and more like a set of expected behaviors and just set reactions. You can see this clearly in how fast communities solve games now, how fast they find hidden secrets. Because the moment the game launches, within hours, there's a tier list, broken builds, fastest routes, and things you're doing wrong videos. And for some players, that's helpful, and for others, it completely kills the game. It kills the discovery. Because instead of learning through play, they're learning through content, and that changes how the game feels. It turns into exploration, into homework, and experiments into optimization. Content creation also has changed difficulty. It's really in a really interesting way because games now have to be playable, entertaining, and watchable all at the same time, and those are not all the same thing. A game that's tense and thoughtful to play can be boring to watch, and a game that's chaotic and ridiculous to watch can be shallow to play. So developers are constantly trying to strike this balance, sometimes leaning too far into spectacle, sometimes inflating difficulty or just randomness to generate clip farming reactions. And another big shift is how success is measured by like sales and reviews. It's not how fun the game is. It's judged by visibility, how long they sit on the front page of Twitch, how often they trend on social media, how many clips they generate, how meta they are. And that creates pressure to design games that are never really settled down, games that are always pushing out something new, something shocking, something controversial, because silence is the death of them. And that affects live service games especially hard, because live service games rely on creators to keep them culturally relevant. So updates are often built around update days, patch reactions, new metas, and outrage cycles. And sometimes it feels like the game isn't evolving for the players who actually play it every night, but for the creators who make tens of millions of videos every day until something changes. This has been seen in Fortnite recently with NickA30. He doesn't play the game anymore, but he has a massive following, so he's able to get things removed. And that's an uncomfortable power imbalance. For people that don't want to talk about it, where a small number of creators can dramatically influence a game's reputation. Sometimes fairly, sometimes not. Sometimes it can get the game shut down, sometimes it will make the game more popular. A single viral clip can damage or fix a game more than months of development can. So, games try to design defensively, trying to avoid backlash instead of trying to create something bold, something interesting. And at the same time, the creators, they're not the villains here because they're responding to the same pressure everyone else is. They know the stress. The algorithm responds strong opinions, hot takes, exaggerated reactions, and absolute statements. So nuisance disappears. Everything becomes either this game is dead or this game is saving gaming. This game is the new Fortnite. And that tone bleeds into how people talk about games, how communities form, and how quickly people turn on something they were excited about 2 weeks earlier. What's wild is how content creation has changed, how people play games even when they're alone, because players are constantly thinking about something that would look good on stream, something that would look good in a clip, how it would be perceived, and that creates a performative effect to the gaming industry, where playing is no longer private, it's potentially public, and somebody's watching. And that's an issue of authenticity, because when games are designed to be content, they can start feeling hollow, like theme parks built for photos instead of experiences. That being said, content creation has also done incredible things for gaming. It keeps niche games alive, it's given indie developers visibility that they would not have before, and has created communities around games that might have disappeared in a month. It has turned gaming into a shared language across the world, so the influence isn't inherently negative, it's just powerful, and power reshapes whatever it touches. The problem the industry hasn't fully figured out yet is how to coexist with that power, because every design decision is filtered through, will this play well on stream? You risk losing the soul of the experience, and when players consume games primarily through creators, they risk mistaking commentary for reality, opinion for truth. So the real question isn't whether content creation is good or bad for gaming. It's whether gaming can remember that its primary audience is still the player holding the controller, not the player watching the screen. If gaming could find a way to balance that and let creators amplify games without dictating them, to let visibility support creativity instead of flattening it, then content creation will be one of the best things to ever happen to the media. If it doesn't, if everything becomes optimized for reaction, for clip farming, it will become a hellhole for the player holding the controller. Graphics. At some point, gaming's crossed an invisible line where graphics stop being about imagination and start being about imitation. And the industry has never really stopped to ask whether that's a good thing, because realism became the default goal, not one option among many. And now it's almost treated like progress by definition. Like if the game doesn't look as close to real life as possible, then it must be behind, unfinished, or inferior, even when that game has absolutely nothing to do with how good the game is. The obsession with realism sounds logical on paper. Better hardware means better visuals. Better visuals means more immersion, but in practice, that equation breaks down pretty fast, because immersion doesn't come from accuracy alone. It comes from coherent style. It's how the world responds to you, and how hyper-realistic graphics can actually work against that by constantly reminding you of what the game can't do yet. Stiff faces, dead eyes, awkward animations, tiny little imperfections that stand out way more because of how realistic the game looks. But when a game looks stylized, your brain fills in the gaps. When the game looks realistic, your brain becomes a critic because you start noticing everything. The way the character moves, the way the light behaves, because you live in a real world. You don't live in a niche, abstract graphics world. So, it will look more unfinished to you. And the industry keeps pushing this because realism is easy to market. You can show a screenshot and people instantly understand the upgrade. You can put it in a trailer and say in-engine footage, and everyone nods, even if the visuals don't even make sense. The experience isn't that deep. It just makes it harder for niche games to get pushed. And that's another part people don't talk about. Hyper-realistic graphics are insanely expensive. So these niche games can't put it in their games. And it's not just about the money, but the time, the manpower, and the creative flexibility. Every asset takes longer, every change is harder, every mistake is more costly, and that leads to a safer design. Because when something costs, you don't want to make a decision that will put you into a bankruptcy or losing money or anything. And because these games take so long to come out, they take long to make. They often release feeling unfinished because no amount of polish can keep up with that level of complexity. So you get the day one patches, performance issues, broken systems, all wrapped in the most realistic graphics you've ever seen. You could be lagging, but wow, the sun looks good. What's wild is realism also has its limits, what designers feel they're allowed to do, because once you commit to realism, everything has to be justified. Mechanics have to make sense in the real world, movement has to feel natural, abilities have to feel grounded, and suddenly the game starts policing its own creativity, and everything fun but unrealistic gets cut because it might break the immersion of the game. And you can see how physics and movements are handled, where developers are afraid to exaggerate or stylize because they don't want to break the illusion. So characters feel heavy, sluggish, feel like your average Joe. And that doesn't mean satisfying always, because games are about feedback and it's about fun. Another side is emotional distance, because hyper-realistic characters invite comparison to real humans, and when they fall short even slightly, it creates this weird disconnect where stylized characters can be expressive, iconic, and memorable without needing to pass a realism test. And that's why people still connect so strongly to characters that look remotely real, because they're allowed to be symbols instead of simulations. And then there's the question of longevity, because realistic graphics age faster than stylized ones. What looks cutting edge today? What looks cutting edge today will be dated in 5 years, sometimes less when stylized games remain timeless. And that means studios are constantly chasing the next leap just to stay relevant instead of building visual identities that last. The push for realism often reduces variety, because when everyone is chasing the same visual benchmark, everything starts to look the same color palettes, the same lighting, the same gritty tone, and that gets boring. People crave for a game to look good, and that's why you see so much love for titles that are niche, that pull back on the whole realistic standard, that don't show all this blood, that have a color palette that speaks to you, that you remember. And a lot of these super realistic games don't understand that. They think, oh, if I make my game as realistic as possible, it will perform the best it can. But that's not always the case. A lot of games that have released recently, they look super good, but they play horribly. They have performance issues. Their graphics constantly burn your GPU, your CPU. It's hard to run on anything you're playing on, and that makes it more of a niche title, something that you need to have the right software to run. And that software is hard to get your hands on, especially with today. The gaming industry is expensive. To get into consoles like the PS5 is around $600. And since AI and gaming and AI in general has raised the prices of RAM and a whole bunch of other PC parts and gaming console parts, it's going to get even harder to get into gaming when you have to pay an arm and a leg for a console or a PC. And AI is beneficial sometimes. If you put it in the game correctly, it can feel super fun, it can feel super immersive. It can feel like the enemies are actually looking at you, actually responding to how you fight and your movement. But at the same time, AI can also be dangerous. It can be used to generate a boring part of the game. AI has no soul. So when you're playing a game that was generated with AI, you can tell. And that's just very unfun for the player. It might look good on paper, it might look good on stream, but the player can tell that this wasn't made with a human player in mind. It was made with an artificial intelligence brain, which thinks it knows what it wants, but truly it doesn't. And with these realistic graphics nowadays, it's hard for these developers to choose between how realistic they want it. Because at a certain point, if you're making a game that's super realistic and has fighting, has guns, you're going to have to put blood, you're going to have to put gore. And these developers don't want their game being R-rated because it's harder for it to sell. They don't want these games to be criticized for being too violent. They don't want these games to be just banned from houses because, oh, look at all this blood. And that's the problem with all these super realistic games. In niche games, the blood can be replaced with different things. Maybe you're fighting robots, maybe you're fighting aliens, all these things. But in these super realistic games, it has to be blood, because if you're fighting a human, what else is going to come out? So this leads an odd point. You can either make it super realistic, which is gory, and get it R-rated, make it a little weirder. I don't agree with the whole super realistic gore standpoint, because there's been an argument for many years about games being too graphic and forming a young mind into being more aggressive. And as I don't believe that, for a lot of titles, a lot of these more realistic titles are making gore more desensitized to a younger audience. And that leads to more aggression among a younger audience and more desensitization to gore. And that's not something you want. There's a certain point where it gets too realistic and it starts imitating real life. And these people get so used to seeing this that they won't mind it when they see it in real life. And that is a true problem that these super realistic games bring to the table.